started? Sounds good? All right, how's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
Good. Everybody have a good May Day yesterday? We were just joking that it was a big ask to ask people after all the work they did to make May Day so powerful yesterday, and then we have such beautiful weather days in a row to come spend their lovely evening in this room. But we try to keep everybody very cool, so we'll keep it cool. My name is Isaac Ontiveros. I'm one of the co-directors, along with Rachel Herzing of the Center for Political Education. The Center for Political Education is a resource for left, labor, progressive, people of color organizations and communities. We believe the more our movements take, the more energy our movements take to think together, to develop theory together, to relate to movements across all the different borders that are dividing working people, to dig in and understand our history. The stronger we'll be, the stronger our strategies will be. We hope that you took a moment to sign in, and what we'll do with your information, we're not going to sell it for much. What we're going to do is we try to keep these conversations going. We try to not have the ends of our events and programs be the end of the conversation. So what we try to do is within a couple of days send out some resources that are based on, I don't know, some idea that was very well developed and people were excited, or somebody said, oh, maybe we talk about that later, and then we don't. We try to keep the conversation going by trying to send them info, things to watch, listen to, read. So please sign up, and also please consider supporting the center by coming to events and spreading the word. So one of the things we think it's important to do every time that we gather is to honor the land and honor the traditional guardians of the land, our indigenous brothers and sisters who have been struggling for centuries against colonialism. I think it's relevant today to also think about and honor their undying struggle against white supremacy and white supremacist violence. So take a moment and honor our Miwok brothers and sisters. I think I would also like to add to that, given what yesterday was, given what our talk today is to honor our comrades in the United States, across borders, in immigrant communities, in working class communities who fought and died against the ravages of the right, against fascism, against white supremacy across these past decades. I think we want to honor them and feel honored in walking in their footsteps. We couldn't be more excited today to work with Political Research Associates, to have Tarso come and talk, and have Rachel facilitate a bit of a conversation with him. We think that, obviously, I think we all agree that the time is ripe to confront the right, and we believe that confronting the right, one of the best ways we could situate ourselves to do that is to understand the right. And we've been felt so privileged to be in conversations this past month with PRA and talking about this event and digging into their materials. And I was thinking about how there's a lot of different thinking projects and think tanks and institutions. And I think we couldn't do better to support such a vital resource like PRA that is digging in, thinking strong, thinking deep, and producing materials that aren't meant to just kind of be thrown off into the ether or say, oh, here's a catalog of horrendousness, now you can feel smart, but rather to produce weapons for us, to produce tools for us that help us sharpen our strategies, help build our movements, and we very much appreciate their tools, and we think they're sharp ones at that. We think it's important tonight, this gathering, to be maybe for some it's the beginning of conversation, hopefully it's somewhere in the middle, and certainly hope it's not the end. We think it could not be more important for us to better understand our enemies on the right. We want to work to understand their strengths. We want to understand their weaknesses. We want to understand the different connections and networks they are trying to build or opportunistically engage with. And we want to understand their vulnerabilities. We would like to, we hope that this understanding will demystify the right. That it will take something that we are encouraged to think of as a monolith and understand it as a engageable network, as a different relationship, different strategies being employed to further their treachery and so on. And if we understand the world in a historical way, then we understand there's always openings, there's always vulnerabilities, there's always contradictions, and we'd like a deeper understanding that to embolden our organizations, our movements, embolden our strategies, help us defeat our enemies, and carry us to victory. I'm going to pass over to Rachel Herzing, who's going to introduce Tarso. Thank you for being here tonight.
My enthusiasm seeing people on such a beautiful evening after I saw many of you kind of slogging it out in what we call the heat in the Bay Area yesterday. I couldn't be more pleased to be here to welcome Jennifer and Tarso from the Political Research Associates. I first encountered Tarso with Ramos' work with the Western States Center. And I think a lot of people on the West Coast know the Western States Center. And the work that Tarso was doing there as a researcher and then as the director there just really impressed me because it was a critical engagement with anti-immigrant and anti-queer and attacks on religious freedom, campus-based and otherwise. And really thinking about what are some of the dynamics at play. So as Isaac was saying, not kind of some static, cardboard figure of who the right is, but kind of the flows and dimensions and the different forces at play there. And so when I heard that Tarso had moved over to Political Research Associates, I couldn't have thought it was a better fit. And I started working with them, I guess in the early 2000s, produced a thing called Defending Justice, 8 million years ago. And what is funny to me is that my father periodically will probably see this, does an internet search because I'm not so forthcoming with things about my life. And so I'll hear from the relatives, it's like, my dad said I should just look you up on the internet. One of the things that immediately comes up, so I was like, what is he seeing, right, when he does this? Is this definition of the prison industrial complex that we wrote for Defending Justice that gets attributed to me, but actually was a group kind of effort. But it still has staying power. People are using it a lot, and it was a really good exercise, I think, that Political Research Associates put us to try to articulate some of the dimensions that we were seeing back then of the prison industrial complex, why we advocated for abolition. And I feel like since then, they've been a go-to for me in terms of understanding the terrain, understanding the players, and being able to put those understandings directly to work. So I couldn't be more excited when our friend and comrade Linda Burnham said, hey, Tarso's going to be in town, we want to do something. We jumped at the chance because I think it's unique to have him here with us in the Bay Area, and it's just a wealth of knowledge and resources. So I'm not going to say any more. And the scheme for the night is that you will hear from Tarso, and then we'll have a little bit of conversation based on what he says, and then we'll open it up and we'll have a group conversation. Sound good?
Yes.
All right, please welcome Tarso Luís from.
Will people be able to see me if I sit, or is it better if I stand?
Sitting's okay.
Is it all right? Hey. It's, thank you for that very warm introduction. I feel like I'm blushing a little bit. And in the same spirit of humility, in which you mentioned that sometimes authorship is attributed to individuals, would it's a collective endeavor. A minor correction, I worked for many years at the Western States Center, and it was the director of research and ran some programs. I was never the executive director of Western States Center, and I was pleased to be able to work with a couple of different directors during the years there in Portland. Thank you for coming out on such a beautiful evening. I had to ask myself, would I come to hear me on a night this night? So thank you for making that sacrifice of an evening, spend some time with me talking about such uplifting topics, right? Is this, and so I do really appreciate that. And in the spirit of, actually, I also just want to acknowledge it is really wonderful to be in this space with a lot of people I've never met before. Some people I've known since I was a kid, and I haven't seen in decades. Other folks I've been doing political work with for a very long time. It's a really lovely mix of folks who turned out tonight, so thank you for that. And a quick note about this space, which is named after a community activist. I actually met Eric on a trip to Cuba back in 1995, and I didn't realize that this space had been named for him, and so just a lot of feeling a lot of connection to the space and the people here, and so that's really lovely. Much lovelier than much of what we're going to talk about tonight. So, in the a quick note about PRA. So, Political Research Associates was founded by people back in the early 1980s, largely in response to Ronald Reagan's election. That was an election some of you will remember and some of you have heard about. It was an election of somebody who was thought almost an impossible right-wing candidate. He really didn't think that he could take power. And the forces that were organizing for his election, of course, he had been governor of California, so folks in California are more likely than others to kind of know his political history and trajectory before running for president. But the forces that came before and helped to elect him were really new on the scene. The Christian right, which is something we all talk about now, was a totally new phenomenon, right? Conservative evangelicals had largely been apolitical. They had not been part of the political process. They sort of retreated from political life back in the 20s in response to the Scopes monkey trial. There were these newly activated constituencies that were widely regarded, not only by activists on the left, but by social scientists and academics, as kind of just irrelevant. You know, these were folks kind of crazy, kind of fringe, who couldn't possibly have an impact on national culture or politics. And then Reagan was elected, and this coalition that called itself the New Right really rose to prominence and set in motion a set of policies and politics that have really transformed the country. And so in many ways, what we've seen now with the election of Donald Trump is the ultimate culmination, right, of policies and trajectories that have been with us now for decades. So in some ways, Trump is a rupture. In other ways, there are strong continuities. So PRA was founded back in 1981 by political scientists and an activist by the name of Gene Hardesty, who had a sense that not all was well with the direction of the country and anticipated that shift toward right-wing politics and decided that it was important. And this was a radical break. This was at a time when most people, progressive people on the left, really thought that there was a possibility for revolutionary transformation in the United States. So the idea that, well, wait a minute, we got to stop and focus on what the right's doing was really a divergence from how most people were thinking. And so Gene created a new kind of movement organization, a research center, think tank, if you will, that was movement-facing, whose role was to analyze and interpret and understand these right-wing currents, this organized opposition to social justice movements, liberation movements, in order to better inform movement organizations and think about how to adjust our tactics and strategy in light of these changing political conditions. And that's been the mission of PRA for the last almost 36 years. And so I'm very proud, sometimes intimidated, to take on the role of guiding this institution into what we must all admit is a very treacherous period we're all living in now. So that's a little bit about PRA. A quick note about myself, particularly in light of what I think we're going to talk about tonight. I combine my politics and my preoccupation with authoritarianism very honestly. I was born in Brazil. I grew up in the States because my family had to flee a military dictatorship that ushered in a period of of terror, state terror, and persecution of left movements and the general population. And so I grew up with stories of those who didn't get out, who didn't survive. My parents were involved in editing the first editions documenting torture by the regime. I grew up with stories of narrow escapes. I now have kids of my own, and I started telling some of these stories to them when they were quite young, and I didn't do that imagining that these stories would be stories about survival skills for the future, rather than stories about the past. And I see it as my responsibility, all of our responsibility, to avoid that scenario, right? And so, in the spirit of International Workers' Day, which was just yesterday, what I thought I would do is to hold back from the United States for a minute, right? All of us have been thinking about and talking about Trump. That takes up a lot of our time. It's a lot of the noise, right, that we receive on a daily basis. But I want to step back and suggest to all of you that we are experiencing a global political and social realignment towards the right wing, towards autocracy, in some cases towards authoritarianism. That the United States is unique in all kinds of ways, but it is in many ways a manifestation of these shifts. That the election in the United States was neither the first, nor is it likely to be the last shoe to drop in this kind of global realignment. And one has to be careful about generalizing this to causes, because different national contexts are quite different, dynamics quite different across the globe. But whether it's the parliamentary coup in Brazil last April, whether it's the recent regional elections that consolidated power for Modi in India, whether it's the rise of Duterte, the head of basically a death squad leader in the Philippines, is president there, apparently qualifications for getting an invitation to the White House. These are trends that we see everywhere. The surge of the far right in France, and Marine Le Pen making it into the final round of presidential elections that will occur on this Sunday. The emergence of neo-fascists, and that's not a label I'm putting on them, self-identified neo-fascist parties in many countries in Europe, in Hungary, in Poland, and other places. This is a global trend. The United States is part of that. We're not leading that, but we're part of that. In some cases, the foreign policy of the United States is contributing to the conditions that make this possible, just as the United States domestic policy, of course, is contributing to the conditions that is making this possible. I want to suggest that one of the dynamics here is the global crisis created by neoliberalism, right? The economic and social crisis created by neoliberalism has created, by which I mean, because that's a jargon that many folks throw around, by which I mean a combination of austerity economics, a set of policies that have created incredible debt for the state, that have eliminated social responsibility as a prime directive for governments and the slashing social welfare state. Austerity programs that have also directly undermined and attacked democratic expressions of worker organizations and other formation. So by neoliberalism, I mean this kind of package of policies has created such economic and social insecurity and actual either frozen or depressed standards of living for masses of people. It's created a social crisis and a crisis of the legitimacy of the state. We're experiencing that crisis of the legitimacy of the state in the United States. Those are conditions that create opportunities, they create a vacuum, a leadership vacuum, and an opportunity for change. In many cases, unfortunately, it's right-wing forces that have been best positioned to capture that crisis. And so those crises are turning over the state into the hands of the right wing. And by the right wing, I don't also just mean one thing. There are different constellations of forces in different places and different methods by which this transfer of power is taking place. In some cases, such as the United States, it's through an electoral process, not that we can call it truly democratic. In this case, the Electoral College, in conditions of elections where so many millions of people have been disenfranchised, formally or informally, is to call into question whether we can legitimately call that a democratic process. But nonetheless, quite different from the more crass seizure of power in a country like Brazil, where the right realized they couldn't win an election, not even a and so have pursued other means of capturing the state. But nonetheless, as a result of a crisis, including a severe economic crisis, that created the opportunity for that kind of seizure and transfer. So the United States is within this context, within this system, and it's not entirely clear that what will come out of the other end will be anything like a democracy. It's our job to make sure that it is. I think it's fair to describe the situation in the United States as an oligarchy, right, with some characteristics of a democracy, some of the form of a democracy, but with such levels of concentration of wealth and of power is actually to create a different set of dynamics and forces. So I had a chance recently to meet with social movements in Brazil. I spent some time there. I came almost directly then from Spain, where I had a chance to meet with social movements both from the global south and folks in Europe who are fighting against the rise of Le Pen in France and other kinds of conditions. And it's quite sobering to hear about the conditions that social movements are fighting under in many other parts of the world. And some of these are characteristics that are not going to be entirely unfamiliar in the U.S. But as a result of the coup in Brazil, for instance, social movements are under direct attack from both the state and from vigilantes. The number of assassinations of movement activists is stunning. And special units have been set up within the state apparatus to actively persecute and to criminalize, and legal action has been brought against the largest social movements such as the landless workers movement and affiliated movements. The movement against mega projects and dams would be another good example there. And so that kind of direct repression of social movements is something it's not entirely new, of course, in the United States, but it's something that's growing as well. And similarly, from both vigilante as well as from state vectors, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So there are a couple things I want to maybe then shift a little bit and talk about political conditions in the United States. And let me just preface this part by saying PRA considers an important part of our work to be enriching and helping to update the power analysis that progressive and left forces use to consider, what we're up against and how we move. And just as I suggested that back in, 1981, when PRA was created by Gina Hardesty, there was a really incorrect assessment of the constellation of forces in the United States that was driving a lot of organizing work, and I see some eyes rolling, some heads nodding from some of our movement elders in the room. I think that we are in danger of, even after Trump's election, misreading sort of the moment now. And this is not to claim authority over an understanding of this moment, but I do see PRA's role as contributing to a collective process of reevaluating, right, the moment we're in, the conditions that we're up against, so that we can hopefully choose a course or set of courses, right, that has the best prospect, right, for progressive change. So that's the spirit in which I now delve into some of this. Unlike the situation in Europe or in other countries like Brazil that have more of a parliamentary system, which is to say a truly multi-party system, the far right in the United States has not had its own party, right? So you have neo-fascist parties across Europe who have been sending members both into their local parliaments, but also then into the European Parliament in an attempt to take down that project. In the United States, the far right, by which I mean the avowed white supremacist right, whether it's neo-Nazi or Klan or white nationalist or alt-right, which is a strange hybrid between white nationalist and kind of hybrid misogynist, they don't have a political party. As much as we might think the Republican Party is their party, they certainly have not seen it that way. And so an innovation, if you want to think of it that way, of the Trump campaign was to invite those people into a party. Mostly they were pursuing a non-electoral set of strategies, and their vision of a fascist or neo-fascist future for North America didn't in fact involve seizure of the state. They more imagined that the neoliberal state is unviable, which we might agree, is likely to collapse, and they've been preparing for what they might build in the ashes, right, of that, which they imagine much more. These are folks like Richard Spencer, much more kind of notion of a federated sort of set of ethno-islands, right, regions that would federate both across North America and with their brothers, right, in the white struggle in Western Europe. They didn't really have this project of seizure of state power, and then Trump's campaign came along, and boy, wasn't that interesting. And so Trump brought in the far right is a coalition, is a partner, electoral partner for him, and to actually force a reevaluation among some within that movement, including Richard Spencer, who's been considered to run for Congress in Montana, about whether actually the conditions have changed in the United States such that you might be able to launch a kind of neo-fascist electoral project. So Trump is a rupture in some significant ways. But the truth is that in the United States, the far right doesn't have the power base either to elect a president or to govern. So as much as many of us have decried the involvement in senior positions of people like, the former head of Breitbart News, and any number of more junior staffers within the current regime, the fact of the matter is that's not a governing base. There's not enough personnel even of a senior level within that movement to really be a consolidated bloc. So do they have influence? Yes. Does Trump and does this regime pander to them? Yes. And we'll come back to this, but in some ways they're more significant and dangerous in terms of Trump's proclivity to govern from the street, as well as the normal channels of power. And so we'll return to that in terms of a vector of threat and violence that we have to contend with. But in terms of the power bases, Trump cut some really important deals to get elected, and one of the most important that he cut was with the Christian right, a movement that he does not represent in any way, shape, or form, and whom they consider as profane a figure in politics as you can imagine. He has not been with them on any of their core issues. He's been on the other side, at least rhetorically, on many of them. He's a problem. I mean, if this is not an election that any of us have prepared for, it's likewise the case. This is not the scenario that the Christian right, that the Kochs, that any of the major power bases and forces on the right had anticipated. Trump is a surprise to all of them as well. But Trump cut a deal with the Christian right and brought Mike Pence, who is a major figure, a considerable figure, a leader within the Christian right, and somebody with very practical governing experience, which is something that Trump doesn't have, into a formal coalition. And so I mention that because a couple of the sectors of the right that have gained most, both in terms of power and in terms of prominence, the alt-right and the Christian right, are also among the most misogynist of the movements on the right. I want to introduce this notion of misogyny, and one of my colleagues, Alex Ubranco, who's in the audience here, wrote and he recently published, I think, a very important piece theorizing the role that misogyny plays within the right wing right now, that I recommend that you read, and it's not behind a paywall. You can find it on our website, politicalresearch.org. And I want to build on some of the insights that Alex brings to the ways in which misogyny is not just a question of sexism, but a motivating and an animating force within certain right-wing forces. In the following way, I want to suggest that misogyny is a critical element to authoritarianism. If we look around at other historical examples of authoritarianism, with difficulty will you find an example where there isn't what we might call, in kind of contemporary parlance in the United States, hyper-masculinity, a kind of a nationalist aggressiveness, the push towards militarism, both in terms of domestic security, emphasis on domestic security forces, and aggressive foreign policy militarism, are all pregnant, if you could excuse that metaphor, with tremendous misogyny. In the case of that I'm most familiar with outside of the United States, my birth country is Brazil, in fact, misogyny helped to set in motion a chain reaction that ultimately led to the dismissal of Congress and the implementation of full military rule in that country. Let me take just a minute to tell that story, which is amusing if the consequences weren't so dire. This was a moment where the military had come to power with tanks rolling through the streets of major cities, including Rio, but they wanted to maintain the illusion of democracy. And so they reorganized Congress and they created two official parties, an official opposition party and a pro-government party, and even that wasn't working out so well for them. They kept running into defeats in elections, and they eliminated direct elections, and so things were appointed, and even so, they were getting problems with Congress. And a left-wing journalist, Marcio Moreira Alves, ran for Congress and was elected a deputy. And this was during a period where there was not the widespread torture that will come in later, but there was very focused persecution and torture, particularly of land reform movements, and particularly in the northeast of Brazil, which is kind of like the south in the United States. So the poorest, the blackest, the most agricultural region of the country, where there was very powerful peasant organizing, what we here might call farm worker organizing, and the generals set out to stop that movement, and that's where torture began. And so torture was being, leaked stories of torture were being denounced, and this particular representative denounced torture on the floor, at a long floor speech in Congress. And the generals had gotten used to ignoring these detractors, and he went on to denounce other kinds of human rights abuses and other interferences in democratic processes. And finally, almost as a kind of satirical reference, he said, given the abuses, I call on the girlfriends and the wives and the mistresses of military men from the lowest, enlisted person to the generals to engage in an Operation Lysistrata and withhold sex from your men. It was just a satirical barb. Well, this was the part of the speech that got sent to every military outpost in the entire country and provoked such outrage on the part of the generals that it set in motion, a series of abbreviate. They demanded that Congress eliminate their own impunity from prosecution so they could get this guy. And so suddenly, even the pro-government party, the generals themselves had created, balked a little bit and said, maybe this is a step too far. There's lots of organizing, and Congress defeated this initiative to strip themselves, right, of immunity from prosecution. And even the pro-government forces were sort of joined in a rousing version of the Brazilian national anthem, like they did this wonderful thing. And the response of the generals was to say, and they just closed Congress and ushered in a brutal period of repression. I don't tell that story to suggest that that's what's going to happen in the United States, but I tell this story to suggest that often we talk about sexism, even structural sexism in this country, as if it was sort of a secondary, a tertiary kind of issue. But that, at the heart of it, that's not what mobilizes politics. And I think there might be even a particular suspicion about talking about sexism and misogyny in this moment, out of a sense of, well, maybe people are bringing that up purely out of an instinct to defend Hillary Clinton. So this is a partisan issue. Now, if you're going to talk about misogyny as being a fundamental motivating thing in politics because you're a Hillary person, and maybe I'm not a Hillary person, I'm not going to open up the space for that. I think we need to rethink that. I think we need to think about misogyny as something that's much deeper, right, than the personal failings of the 45th president, who we all know as the serial sexual assailant. Right? There's something deeper that's happening in the culture. So I wanted to identify that. Related to that, and drawing some threads across the U.S. situation and what's happening in other parts of the world, and continuing with the theme of trying to introduce some questions that I think are not in the center of our current political conversation about Trump and around authoritarianism, I want to introduce the question of the Christian right and about the religious right more generally. Now, I work with a lot of folks who do labor organizing, whether in the context of unions or in the context of ununionized workers, whether it's worker centers or other worker formations. I work with a lot of folks who are really focused on the concentration of power in the hands of major corporations, which is certainly a feature of politics in the United States and more globally. And in my conversations, there's often a sense that the Christian right is a really unfortunate thing, but it's actually not part of our fight. And I want to suggest that not only is it part of our fight, because if we're leftists and if we're progressives, the persecution of LGBTQ people in the attacks on women's full human rights and bodily autonomy are part of our fight. But even if we're thinking in much more schematic ways, I want to suggest to you that the religious right has been the handmaiden of neoliberalism around the globe. Because economic elites have not been able to create a mass electoral base on a program of giving them more of our money. That is just not a winnable policy. And so the religious right has created a mass base for a politic that has delivered into power a political class that is aligned with the program of neoliberalism. Even where there are some tensions and contradictions, right? The program of the Christian right wants a strong and interventionist state in ways that, say, Paul Ryan's way, or even more to the right, the Koch brothers' way, other Republican parties don't particularly want. On the other hand, the Christian right, and to some extent the Catholic right, are happy to be the recipients of the, from Brazil, maybe the Portuguese word for this, the outsourcing of government services, right? So if the states no longer provide services, they're happy to be the ones who are going to receive those funds, right, to provide social services. And so even in that process of downsizing of the state, the Christian Catholic right are playing a very fundamental role. But this is not just the Christian right. Let's look at the Hindu right. You know, in India, playing a very similar role. The Catholic and the evangelical right from the United States have been training their counterparts in other countries to do exactly the same thing. PRA works with social movement organizations in Africa who are experiencing the imposition, the importation of US-style culture wars that have served the purpose, among other things, of realigning the major churches. And let's think about how this has happened in the United States. From having economic justice be their top concern, the thing for which they'll go to the mat, even if they're also fighting against women's bodily autonomy and they've got a big problem with homosexuality and are really committed to traditional gender roles, so part of that. But the thing they're going to go to the mat for, right, is economic justice and inverting those priorities. Where the thing they go to the mat for, right, is denying women's bodily autonomy, denying the full human, civil, political rights of LGBTQ people. That becomes the priority. And in so doing, pulls those church forces away from a contestation with neoliberal forces. That's not just the United States. I've been invited to go to Europe, give talks to groups over there who are dealing with growth of the Christian right, partly through the technical assistance of Christian right groups in the United States. And I was invited to go there because we've got expertise in the United States and we were going to tell them how to fight the Christian right. And the story I told was a cautionary tale. Please don't do what we did. We lost that, right? It's not that the Catholic Church was with us on all of these things, but we lost that positioning of these institutions, right? We fought largely on their ground. We fought on the fights that the right chose, and we lost that positioning. Don't let that happen. That's a fight that's actively happening now with the Catholic Church in Europe, with the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's happening with the surge in evangelicalism in Africa and in Latin America, the fight over the positioning. The evangelicals in Brazil probably made possible the Worker Party election of Lula for the first couple of rounds. They provided some of the base for that election. They aligned themselves with the Workers' Party to help make that happen. They perceived that they didn't have the capacity to elect their own person. And now they have read the tea leaves and they understand that the power game has changed and it may be possible for them to elect their own person. Now, still the evangelical right in Brazil is not the same as in the United States. And state institutions, including federal educational institutions, hold a level of status and stature there that's difficult to undermine. So the trajectory won't be the same as in the United States. But this shift is an incredibly important shift. And if we don't understand the role that the largest mass base of the right wing plays in terms of ushering in neoliberal politics, then we're not being serious in our power analysis, right? Another way of saying this is the part of the right wing that is most in our face is not always the one that's wielding the most power, right? And so if we're going to be serious about developing a strategy, we have to understand how they're putting together the power in their coalition. So again, biggest winners in the United States, Christian right, a huge one. It remains a little bit to be seen exactly what that's going to mean. They are being rewarded. I don't know whether how many of those of you in the room follow this kind of thing. There was a leaked executive order on religious liberty, which is to say this is their kind of like family values. This is the frame that they've put on a program of basically eliminating the establishment clause of the First Amendment that says the government shall not have an official religion. They've made arguments about the free exercise of religion that are really about creating the conditions for the imposition of their particular interpretation of Christianity, which is the son of a revolutionary evangelical pastor I find particularly offensive. But that's a big dynamic that's going on here. I want to pull back then from these pieces for a minute to talk about the dynamic of Trumpism itself in terms of what's happening at the state level and a bit of maybe what's happening on the ground. So, as I mentioned earlier, Trump is perhaps certainly not the first right-wing president, right? But Ronald Reagan was pretty awful. If we look at the team that Ronald Reagan, the sort of cabinet level positions that Ronald Reagan filled, they were, pretty awful. They were fairly similar. And there's even some overlapping personnel from then to now, if you can believe it. But there was a lot that was different then compared to now. And the main thing, in my view, is that there was much more that stood in the way of that agenda. First of all, the state apparatus hadn't been so badly weakened as it has now after 40 years, right, of imposing neoliberal policies. But our movements are a lot weaker, right? The trade union movement doesn't have the power that it had in the 1980s. Mainline churches, social justice-oriented churches, don't have the kind of status and power that they had. The liberation movements in the United States that took such energy from the decolonization movements in the South are in a really different place today. The anti-war movement is much weaker, in part because of demobilization under Obama, which is the whole thing we have to deal with now as this administration prepares for war. But there's a lot less standing in the way, and the right has claimed so much more political real estate. Ronald Reagan had to contend with the Democratic Congress. Ronald Reagan presided over mass legalization, right? And so, we put out a piece on the day after the election. And because it's an occupational hazard, because this is our job, we had to do some of the thought experiment of what if Trump was elected. We didn't have the luxury to think, well, he's not going to be elected. So we talked to a bunch of people, we thought a lot about it. We tried to do our best figuring, and so night of the election, we were like, halfway through, we were like, okay, this is what's going to happen. And one of the things we suggested is that the threat to human, civil, and constitutional rights that we face in the United States as a result of this outcome is more severe than anything certainly in the living generation that we have in the United States, and possibly more severe as anything we've seen really since the time of a backlash against Reconstruction, just in terms of the concentration of power, the fragility of democratic institutions, the full-throatedness of white supremacy as an animating political factor in this moment. So, these are really stark times, right? As I bitterly joked to somebody that very week about how we had to begin organizing for the elections in 2020, my retort was, yes, we have to make sure we have them. And I don't think that's really a question at this point, but I think that we have to have a sober reflection on just how far towards the abyss, right, we've come. We're really at a precipice. And as I said earlier, I think it's a global precipice. And Naomi Klein writes about disaster capitalism. And as we saw, if we went back to the time of Reagan, the playgrounds for neoliberalism were with authoritarian regimes. It was with Pinochet's Chile, right? Actually, much more the Brazilian generals have a different kind of position on it. And similarly, neoliberalism is perfectly compatible with authoritarianism, right? And it may in fact need authoritarianism at this point, as its model has come to exclude, right? The Saskia Sassen rights has come to exclude so many that how do you maintain order when you've given up even on the model of supporting, a predatory capitalist system through consumerism, with people having enough money to even support it. If you're not going to even offer that much, what is there beyond investing in domestic and foreign security forces? So these are precipitous times. Trump's proclivity to govern not only, if you can call what he does governing, because that's a whole other discussion. We've been very fortunate he's not good at it. Not only from the whole power, but from the street is something we really have to pay a lot of attention to. And this is a point I particularly like to reinforce in blue cities, in liberal cities, San Francisco, Boston, New York, and other places. It's easy to not really have a sense of what's happening on the ground in most of this country, right? And when people say to me, we need to have sort of, we have to have a network of rebel cities, my response is, that's great, but I'm not interested in an archipelago, right, of social justice experiments surrounded by an ocean of reaction, because we know there's climate change and the tides are rising, and I don't think that's a good scenario for us. And so it's important to acknowledge that just as there is death squad and vigilante violence attacking social movements in places like Brazil, we're looking at an upsurge of vigilantism in the United States. We're working with rural groups in places like Oregon, where if you go to a public meeting and you speak your mind in defense of a public library, you're liable to get shouted down by somebody in camouflage fatigues and putting a long barrel gun. Right? This is part of the political reality that we're dealing with, at this point in the United States. And so conditions are pretty severe, and we see similar kinds of patterns. If you look at the voting patterns for the National Front in France, we see an incredible urban-rural divide. We see the growth of the far right in exurban and rural areas. We know that Trump picked up tens of millions of votes at a time when there was tremendous voter suppression, tens of millions of votes in rural and exurban areas. So those are divides that we have to be very serious about. And think about how we leverage whatever power we have in urban areas, not just for ourselves in this, to sort of reinforce these bubbles, to try to create a kind of a bubble of sanctuary, but to think about how we leverage that for the people who have been abandoned, right, to wastelands of reaction. Right? That's a real dynamic. I want to maybe conclude with some observations before that we have an animated discussion about solutions and responses, how we can help people do. I want to just have a couple of notes about what's happening at the federal level. And my apologies, I've been out of the country for a couple of weeks, and so I'm sure there are all kinds of recent developments that I'm not fully attuned to. But the tenuous coalition that Trump has, and it's super tenuous in part because he ran against a lot of it in his campaign, is held together mostly by the promise of opportunity. They've captured so much real estate, there's so much opportunity that they've got to be able to cut some kind of a deal here, right? If you're Paul Ryan, you're thinking, this guy wants to spend, tens of millions of stuff on military and other things that I don't particularly want to do. But if in the process we can bake in the elimination of federal commitment to healthcare, right? If in the process we can gut public education, if we can gut all of these things for forever, if we can make permanent changes to the infrastructure, yeah, maybe we can cut a deal. And they've had a very hard time. They've had a very hard time doing it. And I think that there are two forces, maybe more than anything, aside from, frankly, the competency in terms of experience in governance, that have contributed to this. One is the incredible organizing that's happened by liberals and from the left, the immediate response to the Muslim ban, the incredible organizing that's happened during the recess periods has stiffened the spine, or at least with fear, if nothing else, with fear and courage, of the Democratic Party to avoid capitulation that seemed almost inevitable. That's really significant a victory for us. It may not feel like a victory, it doesn't move us in the direction we want to go, but it's a firewall. It's been incredibly important. We have to take credit for that. Don't sell that short, right? The second is pressure from the right flank. You know, I think the Kochs have done more to avoid dramatic spending on a southern border wall on $54 million to the military, although we still might get quite a bit more there. Massive spending on border security, right? Domestic policing forces, starting with the border, right? Is what that means. Then the left has been able to achieve. So the faction fighting, the divisions and the wedges within the right itself, between those who actually want a state project and those who don't want a state project, is very significant. And it's not a wedge we get to drive particularly, but it buys us time. And you know, it buys us more time than I thought we were going to have. And we have to be very judicious about how we use that and not squander it. Right after the election, I talked to probably many of you, certainly to many others, about this precious period of time we had between the election, the sort of that, what Matt Seagrass, a colleague and comrade of mine, called the earthquake of the election and the tsunami that would begin once Trump took office, right? This was not a time to like rest and say, well, we'll figure out what we'll do next year. This was a time to lay plans, a time we would never get again. Well, we haven't exactly got an extension, but we've gotten the disarray on the right has created some openings and conditions for us to really think about not only the resistance that most of us spent that time of 3 months planning for, but what are the opportunities for some offensive fights that strengthen our defense, that improve our morale. We really need to improve our morale. What are build some skills and begin to incorporate some of the tens of millions more people who are available to us on November 9th than have been available to us on November 7th. So let's take advantage of some of the disarray on the right to move forward beyond the defense and to build some offensive capacity, to expand, to turn more outward rather than inward in terms of the political education we're doing in spaces like this and others. And so I'm mostly looking forward to having a conversation with you all about some of those opportunities. So if that was a sobering lead up, I'm hoping that we get to think about a transition to that. What then must we do part of our conversation?
Can we give Tarso a hand? Thank you.
I'll just mention them. And like I said, everything we publish is available on our website free. This is a report that we did together with a rural organizing project that makes some passing references to right-wing paramilitaries in the state of Oregon. This is both an expose that we did and an activist resource kit with case studies and tips for organizers in these rural communities who are facing that particular manifestation of white nationalists and so-called patriot movement organizing. For those of you who are thinking about, what does it look like to fight the hard right on the ground in very difficult political terrain, I highly recommend you take a look at this. And we were very proud to publish a piece by Matthew Lyons, a really important political analyst, anarchist thinker, co-authored together with PRA's longtime and former senior political analyst Chip Roulette, an important book called Right-Wing Populism in America. Matt wrote a piece that we published called Alt-Right, Control, Alt, Delete, which is a really important study of the intellectual foundations of the alt-right movement. Many people on the left and liberals have criticized us for using the term alt-right under the idea that it's kind of a smokescreen for white nationalism. And Matt makes the case that in fact it's not your parents' white nationalism. It is in fact a different thing. It's worth thinking about it in those terms, including because of the hyper-misogyny that I was mentioning. And so please, if you're interested, take a look at that. For some of you who are interested in talking about dealing with the alt-right, and I know that there have been some folks who come to town, Milo has been here, and some others, I'd be happy to engage in the conversation.
Thank you. So,
Well, you know, if I used to do Justice Way, I feel like I'm on, fired guys.
I'll try to crank up my best Buckley for you. So many things struck me about what you said, so I just want to draw out some threads that maybe we can develop more fully in full conversation. But one of the things that struck me was, you touched very briefly on some of the work that you've been doing, both with trade unions and with worker centers and other kind of working institutions of workers. And one of the things that's been on my mind a lot that I wonder if you could tease out a bit more is, given the weakness of trade unions in the United States right now, and all of this rhetoric that we're hearing about kind of the fight for the white working class, right? Kind of just tease that out a bit more around kind of what does that fight look like from your perspective of monitoring the right? And what does the fight for working class people of color look like? Also from the right? Not necessarily just kind of from the right.
Oh, those are great questions, and really complex ones, right? So, we're all familiar with this narrative about, what we need to do now is to court the white working class, is I think a tactic, a strategy to pivot away from dealing with questions of structural racism and racial injustice in the United States, and also like a strange kind of nostalgia on the left. I mean, we talk about nostalgia as an animating force on the right all the time. Strange nostalgia on the left. I mean, one of the problems that I think we had in certainly this last election cycle, but it's a more baked-in problem that we have, I think, in terms of discourse, political discourse in the United States, including discourse on the left, is that our discourse around race and our discourse around class actually are very atomized, right? There's a very powerful animating discourse around wealth concentration, the 1% and 99%, which is a very important discourse. It's been a transformative discourse in some significant ways. And we have a discourse around racial injustice that what most of the public gets of it is decrying state violence and police persecution by rebellious and rowdy and dangerous classes of dark-skinned people. And these are entirely separate conversations, and not only do they not engage with each other, but they pivot away from each other, right? Where the economic inequality discussion sometimes used to pivot away from conversations about racial injustice, or to the extent it talks about race, it's in the context of sort of disproportionate harm or something like that. Well, the right-wing populist narrative puts these together in a very powerful way, right? It's the racialized makers and takers narrative. And so Trump, as much as he seemed difficult for many to understand, certainly to diagram a sentence and that kind of thing, so it's easy to make fun of, but the logic of his arguments were very clear and consistent, right? His story is that liberal elites, sometimes Jews, liberal elites, sometimes bankers, sometimes the same Jews and bankers, are taking your stuff. They're taking your money, they're taking your wealth, they're taking your status, they're taking your country, and giving it to dark-skinned, foreign, dangerous, predatory, non-Christian classes of people as a form of political patronage in exchange for maintaining the power of these liberal elites. That's the story, right? Makers and takers. And so right-wing populism always does that. There's a rhetorical tongue lashing against the banks until you're like the president and report people from Goldman Sachs, right, to run the government. So there's a rhetorical tongue lashing, and sometimes it is actually a shift to replace these elites with those elites, right? But the actual lashes are downward lashes, right? That's where the punishment comes. It's all targeting downward, right? And this sometimes confuses folks on the left, and maybe particularly folks without a racial justice analysis, right, who imagine themselves to be leftists, because they're like, well, half of this equation seems right. I mean, there's all this anti-elite rhetoric. Let's not worry that it's kind of coded anti-Semitism and this and that. We can build on that, right? So you got the Fed thing that, is all over Occupy News and so forth, because there were these, this false populism that comes from the right. Well, it's a huge problem that left discourse around race and economy isn't put together. We don't talk about racial capitalism in the United States, right? We don't talk about it. where was the candidate for president? And I supported Bernie, loved Bernie, I thought that was a great intervention. Where was the candidate who was talking about how racism has been economic suicide for most white people for the past 30, 40 years? It may have helped you once. It might have helped to create a white, an exceptional white middle class at one time, but that game is over. That game's been over for 30, 40 years. In fact, why do most white people have healthcare anymore? Why is education going down the tubes? Because the argument that what we need to do is deny public services to these undeserving people, right, that Trump talks about, has resulted in folks voting for policies and politics that have fundamentally undermined their own material well-being. So this discourse at this point, to come back to the original question, this question at this point about where's the white working class, first of all, it's not an accurate description of who the working classes are, at this point. There is not a large industrial white working class in this country anymore. That's not the way, right? And Trump ain't bringing it back, and neoliberalism in bringing it back. Those jobs are not just going overseas; they're going away entirely, right? So when Trump says he's going to bring those back to care, it's not just that that's not going to happen, but those jobs are going to go away. The people who work in this area in AI and robotics, those jobs are disappearing, right? It's another thing the left is not really dealing with, it seems to me, in terms of the next wave. As somebody who's preoccupied with the possibility of disaster totalitarianism or disaster authoritarianism, imagine unemployment levels for the general population. I'm not talking about the levels that already exist in the black community or exist in the Native American community, but for the general population, talk about unemployment rates of 20, 25, 30%. Imagine the politics we would have, right, in this country. That's a possibility. So this is an attempt to pivot away, right, from this question. What we can't do is just then resist talking about, well, what do we do about the millions and tens of millions of people who may have voted for Trump and who Trump has already betrayed? I don't think we can write those people off, right? A fundamental commitment that PRA has is to draw a very clear distinction between the strategists of the right and people who are mobilizing to think into right reform. The biggest difference between me and somebody who is voting for Trump is who organizes them. It's not how smart I am, it's not how hard I work, it's not how critical a thinker I am, not even how educated I am. The person who started the network that's organizing militias is a Yale law graduate, right? So it's not a question of, we're the smart ones and the problem is ignorance on the right. We have to compete for those people. We have to have something to offer them. And so that impulse, I think, is correct. The problem is pitting that against some notion that what got us into this mess was like a left-wing identity politics. Well, it's all identity politics. And why do you think Trump is amidst? And this is white identity politics writ large, right? And so I think we need to be careful babying the bathwater here and not, when folks are saying, well, we need to deal with competing for part of Trump's space, I think that's right. I think there are tens of millions of people that Trump is trying to throw off the healthcare world, and those are our people. And it's our job to get them. And part of our job is to accelerate the awareness of that betrayal as quickly as possible, right? It buys us time, it buys them opportunity, it gives us an opportunity to have marginal forces. And the practical questions are, where are those opportunities? Because if you pose it as, well, let's go recruit Trump voters, well, that's not a strategy, right? We have to think about discrete populations of people where there is a point of connection. You're going to lose your health, right? You're gonna get recruited into the next war, right? Because as the fragility of Trump's coalition is revealed again and again, the logical thing for Trump to do to try to solidify his ranks and to get his folks to swear allegiance is to bring the United States into war. It's really a question of where and to what extent rather than what. But let me shorten the list.
No, that's fascinating, and I think one of the other things that I was thinking about that crystallized a bit more when you were talking about the bakers and takers, frame is also the concept of discipline, right? And the act of disciplining particular segments of society under authoritarian, regimes, or under kind of some of the identity politics, right? Kind of looking both in, right? And I was thinking in particular about some of the things that we've seen, for instance, coming out of North Carolina, just as one example, right? Around the bathroom bills, for instance, right? And you had raised misogyny as kind of one of these cornerstones, or one of these movers, accelerators, right? And I was thinking a lot about discipline, but also around visibility and invisibility, and who gets disciplined into being invisible, who gets disciplined out of public space, right? So we can talk about, the move toward privatization generally, particularly in terms of private space, public space, and that kind of thing. But there's a nature to the gender policing and a nature to the disciplining into invisibility, I think, that gets amplified for me in situations like that. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of other gender dimensions in that issue of discipline as well, too.
I'm going to respond. You'll let me know if I'm on the same wavelength as you on this question. So a couple of pieces here. One, I want to tease out a little bit more what I was talking about in terms of like the alt-right misogyny in a space like that. Any movement, sexism is pervasive, right? Structural sexism is pervasive. It's not unique to the right wing. We deal with it in our own movements, in our own organizations, and so forth. But any movement, social movement, or movement that survives the test of time, comes to grips with the fact that women do the work. Women do the work of our movements. And so if you don't have women as organizers and recruiters and in leadership roles, movements just don't succeed at a certain point. So even if you maintain a hierarchy of gender power, as is typically the case, you come to grips with that reality, even within a kind of sexist order. On the alt-right, you actually have prominent figures who say, my answer to the question of what the role of women should be in our movement is that the question is irrelevant. And this has begun to backfill into other white supremacist spaces where women are banned from even posting on their websites. So the degree of misogyny, the notion that women are not social, never mind political actors, and this is beyond sort of the Christian right traditional gender role piece of it, right? This is a different level of magnitude. This is a level of demonization and dehumanization that we often associate with white supremacy, right? That kind of racist dehumanization that happens. So there's a current there. It's not a dominant current, but tells us something, sort of the canary in the coal mine, tells us something about our participable politics in this moment. If that can be a politics that builds, that's a mobilizing and a building politics, there's a thesis I think needs to be tested that misogyny is a gateway to white nationalist organizing, that sexism is so commonplace and so accepted that it's easier to recruit into white nationalism by way of a kind of militant and aggressive misogyny. I think there's certainly a lot of smoke suggesting that may be the case and that needs to be interrogated more. But that policing then of women's role in society at that level, and of course the permissiveness that's given, the kind of what we used to call dog whistle politics, but now we're just like siren, right? They're siren politics that we get from the current president of the United States that opens up the space for this kind of policing is tremendous. But perhaps you had something else in mind in terms of...
Yeah, I think I'm interested in two pieces of it. I'm interested in the kind of legislative aspect of it, right? So in the kind of legislation of this type of what I'm calling, disciplining into invisibility. And also a way in which I think it purposefully distracts from misogyny by identifying transgender people as the real moral panic and not, necessarily loose women or, women who will have autonomy, right?
Well, so there are a number of things that are super interesting about the HB2 bill in North Carolina that's been dubbed the bathroom bill, which is self-distraction. You know, I was mentioning earlier that in many ways the politics of Christian right have been a handmaiden, right? Were chosen deliberately in a moment where Margaret Atwood's book is, you know, receiving a resurgence. There's a mini-series, I guess, based on it and so forth. Now, this is a very interesting case study in that. So one of the things that's been happening over the last number of years is that the Christian right and the corporate right have been finding ways to intertwine their legislative strategies. And I'll come to HB2 in a moment, but I think a really interesting example of this was a Hobby Lobby ruling, right, at the Supreme Court, which is just of, I think it's difficult to exaggerate the consequence, the implications of that, right? So with Citizens United, we got kind of doubling down on this fiction of corporate personhood. It was like the ultimate neoliberal, right, fantasy, right? So, you know, corporate person had been written in there for legal purposes, but here we're taking it to a whole other level of the notion of money as speech, and we all know the dark money consequences and all the rest of that, that have helped to transform and to accelerate the dominance of neoliberal forces in the United States. When the Hobby Lobby ruling, this strategy I mentioned earlier in passing around using the free exercise clause to try to get around the establishment clause came together with this notion of corporate personhood. And if you allow me the metaphor, if under Citizens United we were still in the fiction, right, of corporate personhood, with Hobby Lobby, it's like the Pinocchio scene where it's like, I'm a real boy. You know, the endowing of corporations with religious freedom or rights and therefore conscience is an absurdity. But that's the legal fiction we're now living under. So the merger of that Christian rights strategy and that corporate rights strategy has particularly damaging, you know, and devastating implications for us going forward in terms of another step towards not only corporate rule, but theocratic rule. And for those of us who think of these as fundamentally different things, consider that Hobby Lobby is a corporation, and consider that the Christian right has leadership that runs massive institutions, right? So whether it's the Walton family of Walmart or the DeVos family, these are oligarchs that happen also be under Christian right. So these categories of corporate power and then ideologically driven Christian right are not clean categories, right? They overlap in all of these ways. So circling back around to what you were asking about, a big corporate strategy over the last number of years, actually decades, but it's accelerated, is this idea of preemption. And what they're trying to do is to shift the arena of decision making to the arenas that they control. And where the right has been most dominant has been through state legislatures up until the capture of the federal, all three branches of the federal government. And so this gets back to this, municipalism question. There's a tremendous amount of innovation that's been happening at the municipal level, the passage of minimum wage increases, paid sick, family leave, all kinds of initiatives, right, at the municipal level. The response of corporations to that is to build on things they've done in the past. The tobacco industry used to do this around local smoking bans. They would get sent to legislatures to pass ordinances saying, well, you can't determine that at the local level, it's going to happen at the state level to try to preempt it. That's the notion of preemption. Well, they've accelerated this in response to this surge in local work organizing that's been happening. Well, the Christian right and the corporate right were sometimes the same people, and DeVos, in fact, was directly involved in this, as it happens. Another thing to know about our current education secretary, it's hard for me to say those words, figured out how to package the Christian right agenda of preemption together with the corporate right agenda of preemption. And so the flagship question became one of trans rights and overruling municipalities' ability to control the question of gender-neutral bathrooms and so forth, and trans people being able to use the bathroom of the gender which they identify. But in fact, that bill was chock full of other kinds of preemption. It said you could not pass minimum wage laws, you could not pass any wage or working standards legislation, and beyond that, it eliminated redress in state courts for all manner of civil rights violations based on race, based on gender, and based on other things. But the flagship thing became the trans rights thing, both because it was a way to rally the legislators to push back on, you know, the marriage equality ruling of the Supreme Court and so forth. But it also became this kind of red herring issue, right? Because the compromise, right, that came down subsequently, right, was to have a moratorium on the question of local statutes on that, but left in place the preemption on all the worker justice and other civil rights issues. And so I think this is a very clear and concrete example about how these, what we would call the culture war issues of the Christian right, are the wedge issues that open up the space for other strategies for closing public space and for fiscal, you know, for economic austerity. And so it's not just the anti-diversity stuff, it's not just targeting, we used to get these statewide bills to eliminate the civil rights of LGBTQ people. It's you know, they're riding the current wave of social panic to achieve a fairly broad agenda. And so corporations fall on both sides of these questions, right? They're afraid of boycotts. Some of them have really invested in this notion of being good corporate citizens, and especially including lots of LGBTQ people, you know, in their workforces. And so they find themselves on the side of the Chamber of Commerce saying, no, we're not going to do that, we don't want to be subject to boycotts. But at the same time, we have many corporations that are in cahoots with the coalition with the Christian right to try to eliminate compensation of their power.
So I'm gonna have a million questions, but I'm only gonna ask one more so that we have plenty of time for the and it's around this issue of wedges, right? So you've mentioned several times, I think, to really good effect, the diversity of players that are involved in the right, the different interests that they have, the different kind of spheres of influence that they occupy. And you've also discussed, you know, potential wedges or cracks that, you know, the left can work into. And so I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about what you see as the most promising from your perspective, wedges or fissures at this point that you think people should be keeping an eye on.
Great, I really appreciate the question. I'm going to come at your question by way of an earlier one that you asked about ways in which the right has appealed to even people of color. And you know, if there's any issue that worked for Trump across many constituencies, it was immigration. Right? It was the demonization of immigrants, and this was very powerful, including for many people of color. So this is separate from, in fact, we probably have a bunch of new nationalist people making bank in the tech sector here, sending money home to the BJP, something to think about. But just at the level of domestic politics, you know, that anti-immigrant wave, and also anti-Islamophobia, these were cross-cutting issues that, you know, they cut through many of our communities, right? So it's important to recognize that power, that as much as Trump represents a consolidation of a cross-class coalition of rights as a strategy for building power, doubling down on the Southern strategy past what should have been the demographic tipping point where that seemed possible, it's not limited to organizing people, so it's important to recognize that. So with that, I think a couple of things. One is that, as I've already mentioned, there's some deep wedges within the rights coalition, right? They're not all fascists. You know, when PRA got started, you know, people, you know, RC would joke that people didn't know the difference between a neo-fascist and a neoliberal, right? We're just called all fascists. And so PRA actually started this work of creating kind of a taxonomy of the right to try to explain it. And also, it's the Christian right where its strength, there was this very strong reaction against anyone who's a Christian, right? So like suddenly, you know, all these folks, all these Christian folks have been doing, you know, social justice organizing, felt like they were tarred with the brush of the Christian right. They were like, look, I've been fighting, I've been doing social justice movement for a bit. So we produced this taxonomy so we can say, look, that person you're calling a fascist actually is a Christian right person who fought in World War II against Nazism. And so coming at them by calling them fascists is not gonna stick. It doesn't work, it doesn't explain their motivation, it's not helpful, and it's in your world, and you're gonna be shown. So it matters to understand people's motivations and what drives them, right? So there are all these fissures, on the right, and there are a number that are interesting, and I mentioned earlier, not all of them play very well to us, right? The Kochs are driving a wedge between like the neoliberals and the hardline neoliberals, the folks who want absolute austerity and those who are willing to compromise some austerity in order to have some more structural adjustment, right, in the US. It's very, very strange. They don't work for us as wedges. But there's some other wedges, right? So as much as I've said we need to understand that the coalition that Trump is trying to hold together isn't just a white nationalist coalition, white nationalism and anti-Semitism, for that matter, are really important wedges that we need to drive. As much as we think of people like Paul Ryan as being responsible for policies that lock in and exacerbate institutional racism, that's not what he thinks his project is. He doesn't think that's his project. He actually thinks that his project is about bringing freedom to all people who can compete in this ruthless economic market, which will produce liberty for the most talented, and that's colorblind, right? He's not color. I mean, I credit that he believes that, and that wing of the party actually believes that. And there are folks even like Grover Norquist, right? The godfather of Prop 13 and all of this kind of tax rebellion. You know, Grover Norquist is married to a Muslim woman, and it gets hell from the far right for this fact. These are people who imagine themselves to be liberals, social liberals in many ways. The idea that they are participating in a coalition that is instituting white nationalism and kind of violent xenophobia is actually a problem to them. That's not what they think they're about. That's a wedge that we have to drive, right? And it's the good news is we can work on that as part of our broader project to deal with this earlier challenge I mentioned around race and class, right? Our talk, our understanding, our theorizing, and especially our ability to talk about these things in ways that aren't lists, right? That are more like ideograms, that it clicks and it makes sense and people understand the reality that we're trying to describe. Doing that work, I think, can be of a piece with driving this wedge, right? The better we get at describing, and not in these terms, the realities of racial capitalism in the United States in ways that are recognizable to most people, the more effective we're going to be at driving these kinds of wedges in the rights coalition. And it's not just anti-Black racism, and it's not just attack on Muslim people, and it's not just the attack on Latino immigrants. I want to say something here about anti-Semitism, because in the current generation of racial justice work, there's not a lot of conversation about anti-Semitism, and I think that we are experiencing the downside of a generation of anti-racist training that I myself have participated in that is far too binary, right? It's forced this notion that you're either white or you're a person of color. And we don't recognize that some whiteness is provisional and revocable. And that's part of how anti-Semitism functions. Not to mention not all Jews are white, but that's how anti-Semitism functions. And anti-Semitism, and we would need more time to do this justice, is a linchpin to white supremacy. You don't get effective systems of anti-Black racism without anti-Semitism, I would contend. And so if we can't recognize that and we can't deal with anti-Semitism, which comes in cycles, so it's surging now in ways that it seemed invisible only a couple of years ago, we're not actually going to be effective in this moment around advancing racial justice. So when I say that white supremacy is a wedge, I include anti-Semitism as really a important piece of that. And it's especially important because this should be a moment in which the old strategies of mobilizing and dividing the Jewish community around a particularly pernicious characterization of what needs to happen in occupied Palestine shouldn't hold. This should be a reset button for us. This should be a broad politic where within the Jewish community, from quite conservative people, right, to revolutionary leftist Jews, should be an alliance against Trump. If that doesn't happen, it's because we failed. And if we can't deal and talk about how anti-Semitism is working in this moment, we could fail to drive that much effectively. So there's a moment where there's this optics of kind of a pro-Jewish white nationalist White House, right? Where you have Jared Kushner, you have Ivanka, who's a converted Jew, you will have candle lightings, right? In the White House, even as the President of the United States has mobilized vicious forms of anti-Semitism, and they're trying to work that wedge to their advantage. That's a wedge we need to be driving very forcefully in the other direction. And frankly, non-Jews need to be calling that out and driving that wedge. Just like we need white people to stand up against anti-black racism, and just as we need non-immigrants to stand for immigrant folks, we need non-Jews speaking out about the ways in which anti-Semitism is being mobilized. And I invite further conversation about that piece of this as well. But I do think also that there's some basic class politics that we need to drive in this moment, right? Trump is continuing, the concentration of wealth and income on the poor is a key part of the agenda of this administration, and so I think that gives us a lot to work with in terms of not wedging their coalition, but building ours, right? It's because it's not only about fracturing them, it's that we need to be a bigger we.
We'll gather maybe a few questions at a time, and then, Tarso can respond as you see fit. Yeah. So I know a lot of you, and I know that lots of people are inquisitive or have opinions. And just acknowledge that as the CPE's practice, this is being recorded, so I don't know if you want to ask a question that you don't want to take, that's equally good. Yeah. Or I guess it's not on tape. Nothing's on tape. That's how old I am.
Tape.
Yeah. So let me take a few questions, and then we'll chat.
I appreciate that you brought Tarso here.
Okay.
It's giving me the chance to catch up with him as well. So, I really appreciate that you brought up Ronald Reagan, because I do see the silver lining of Donald Trump presidency is that a lot of us were energized by Reaganomics and agenda, and I myself was a byproduct of that, or I am a byproduct of that. So a lot of us got a full-throated education because of Ronald Reagan. But I have a lot of friends in the nonprofit sector in the past 8 years. They too attached to the Democratic Party. So I do see that there is a need to remove ourselves as an appendage of the Democratic Party move forward. And as we have talked about, is that there is a lack of political education. I'm generalizing here, so that deep thought analysis, critical analysis is missing on the left. And so how do we have more, I would love to see more discussions like this where we really dig deep and look at the intersections. And I appreciate that you brought up the anti-Semitics bubbling up and all those things. So how do you see the progressive left regrouping, whether with or without Bernie Sanders? Given up, I have given up on the Democratic Party already. So Sanders, anybody else on the left coming along?
All right, take a couple more.
So when the question came up about the wedges being driven, that's something I'm particularly interested in kind of fleshing out a bit. I feel like we touched a lot on kind of driving wedges between Republicans or kind of right-wing power within government and maybe the more radical elements of the more like street presence of the right wing. But I guess I'm personally, I'm afraid of, even if that the latter is abandoned by kind of more traditional Republicans, that this moment, both because of the precarity that you outlined from the decades of neoliberal policies, but that this moment allows those more radical elements of the right wing to also consolidate. And that so that even if they lose maybe their presence in government, what's left in its wake is still a really powerful and really dangerous and deadly force. And maybe if we could flush out the wedges that I guess I see that still exist within those more radical elements of the right, whether you have some groups that seem to be appealing to white college-educated men, you have other groups that are appealing to more like working class, poor Americans, you have others that are based more around that militia movement or Christian right, but that still seem to be kind of trying to figure out how to work together, but more and more do seem to be working together. And maybe strategies to try and start breaking up that more extreme, but seem to be growing element of that, right?
One last question.
Sure. So thank you for your analysis. Just to take it back to sort of what's happening on the global front, can you expand more on how the influence of this regime in creating proxy and real wars is playing out? I'm specifically thinking about Kashmir, always Palestine, but also these hot zones right now that are sort of popping up, and what's going on in North Korea, like it seems like, and just it might be with the visibility of everything that's happening, that these are their like particular moments where they're beyond the tipping point in a lot of cases. And you had talked about, like, especially I'm interested in your analysis around the BJP movement growing in this last election in these small localities, and how it was a very effective strategy, very sort of similar to what was happening with the last election here.
It's a few things to chew on.
Is that all? Awesome. It's gonna be hard to weave some of those things together. Let me see what I can do about this. Starting, I guess, Sonny, with your question about electoral strategy. I mean, obviously, this is a huge discussion. I guess I'd say a couple things about it. The first is, in the work that we do, studying and analyzing the right, seldom do we draw examples of successful organizing on the right and say, that's something we should be doing on the left. It's just not, we're not trying to create a mirror image of the right, what the right has built. However, I will say that in the case of electoral strategy, right, parts of the right have been much more disciplined and successful at creating and managing an inside-outside strategy where they've managed to pull a party to them and to hold it rather than to enter and dissolve themselves within whatever's there currently, which I think is sometimes what can happen in terms of entrism within the Democratic Party. So the ability, for instance, of the Christian right to create an independent power base with its own electoral mobilization capacity that also plays within the Republican Party. When PRE was founded in the early years, we got lots of calls, that I wasn't there at the time, from Republicans. And these were folks who actually had been better than the Democrats in terms of voting for civil rights legislation. These were Rockefeller Republicans. They didn't have the Dixiecrat problems that the Democrats had. And the Christian right was coming to take over their party. And they called PRE and said, what are we doing to keep the Christian right from taking over our party, right? Well, we don't get those calls anymore because that happened, right? And it's not that doesn't create challenges and problems for them within their coalition. They squabble and they fight, and this notion that the right is all like locked up is, they tell those stories about us. Can you believe it? They say, oh yeah, the reason why we have such fierce opposition from the left is because they all believe exactly the same thing and they agree and they march in unison. So it's somewhat true over there, but they have been much more disciplined in figuring out how to do this inside-outside strategy, and when done properly, social movements pull political parties towards them. Political parties tend not to have really strong ideological content, as we have seen with the capitulations to neoliberalism, whether from the Democratic Party and the abandonment of worker politics, or whether we've seen in so-called socialist parties in Europe. I mean, the level of capitulation to neoliberalism is such that people who are coming of political age now could be forgiven for thinking there's not a meaningful difference between the left and the right when it comes to the economy. I mean, that it doesn't look that different because of that degree of capitulation, right? The crisis of the current political and economic order is a general crisis, right? Who would defend this system? And yet we're put in the position sometimes of at least appearing to do that, right? Because of the way the parties are constructed. So if we don't have a program in this country, given the durability of the two-party system, of pulling one of those parties towards us, then we are really in trouble. So I don't, that's not a full solution. It acknowledges and I think agrees with part of your critique about where things have been left. But we have to be really serious about that. It seems to be as a long-range political project. And I think the good news is there are a lot of very possible and winnable local and state kinds of contests that could help be a training ground for people really serious about a long-term commitment to that. That's not PRA's project, but we certainly think that that's an important debate to have in terms of strategy going forward. With respect to the foreign policy kinds of questions that came up, and I'll circle back around to this piece. A couple of things I want to say about the international arena. One of them I kind of implied earlier, but I guess I want to say directly in terms of challenging U.S. parochialism. That bizarre contradiction of being a seat of global empire and yet the most parochial country on the planet. It's kind of a maddening phenomenon, right? Last Friday, tens of millions of workers and others in Brazil, general strike, shut down transportation. It's like, you find this much news not in the United States, right? Maddening. But in terms of an internationalism, beyond recognizing that there's this global political realignment, there are continents around the world with a lot more experience about organizing under conditions of severe repression than most of us have. We have that history here too, but then most of us have in the United States, and we shouldn't think that all the answers are going to come from here, right? And so part of practicing internationalism is solidarity with other struggles, and also knowing when we need help. When in fact, we're not the ones who are going to be delivering the goods, that other people are going to help save us. And we need to reach outward for several solutions. So I wanted to make a little commercial for that. I'm not intimately familiar with all the specifics of the regional contest. I know that not unlike the United States, it was thought that this might be an election that would deliver a significant defeat to the BJP at the regional level. Amazingly, the BJP was able to convert this preoccupation with corruption, in which it's entirely complicit, into an asset for themselves. I do think that the outcome tells us something about the strength and durability of this alliance between religious fundamentalism and neoliberalism. We see this actually also in Iran. Interestingly, people think of that as a theocratic state that somehow therefore must not be neoliberal. It's a profoundly neoliberal state. I guess maybe what I could contribute a little bit, if it's not the heart of your question, at least related to it, is I think a big challenge for the administration right now is what kind of war is good for it. What kind of war will help it to consolidate its forces, tamp down on the internal dissent, play to its dominant messages of the threat from Islam and from immigrants, without getting into an impossible and truly dangerous kind of war and full-blown contest with Syria or frontal confrontation with Iran. I think there's been a reassertion, although this is not my area of expertise, my impression is there's been a reassertion of the kind of the national security establishment to the point to pull back from that, notwithstanding the kind of saber rattling we're seeing in North Korea, which is also, of course, incredibly dangerous. My hunch, and it's just that, so take this with a shaker of salt. My hunch is that there will be efforts to heat up certain existing regional conflicts. Yemen is a good example, perhaps. It's a proxy war opportunity with Iran, aligning with Saudi Arabia, contestation with ISIS, the opportunity to posture as a major confrontation with, a radical Islam, using the term that Trump likes to use. So I think there's a shopping perhaps that's going on for like what's the scale of conflict that is sufficient enough to give some disciplinary power to this regime without really creating an impossible global confrontation. And that's a dangerous, of course, kind of gamble to play, but it's the calculus that I would suppose, right, is underway now. And some of this quid pro quo of dumping money on the military, one must imagine is part of that negotiation that's happening, whether openly acknowledged or not. And as I mentioned earlier, I am concerned that the anti-war sort of sector that we have is has atrophied, right? So there was powerful organizing in the Bay and some other places during the George W. contestations, and even here I think that some of that really suffered from the fear of weakening, the Obama presidency and all the contradictions and contestations that involved. And so the question of preparing for that inevitable front seems to me a really important question. I do wonder whether, in terms of folks who have relationships with, freedom struggles in other places, including in India, I wonder what lessons you think we might draw from that. And so back to that sort of inverting the technical assistance that's so desperately needed in this moment. On this question of, I really appreciate the question about sort of wedges on the right. A couple of things. First, a clarification. Yes, part of what I was trying to address with this notion of driving a wedge between sort of official politics of the right and sort of the ground forces of the right. So that's one wedge. But beyond that, what I was trying to suggest was that going hard at white nationalism, going hard at xenophobia, going hard at immigrant politics, going hard at anti-Semitism is also a way to drive wedges within the actual governing coalition of the right. Because part of the austerity caucus, if we can put it that way, the new liberal caucus, does not want to be associated with that polity. They do not want that to be their legacy. That would be a nightmare for them. And so there's more thinking to do about how to actually practice that politic that drives a real exit, but that should be possible, and it's our job to figure out how to make that work. So it's both that wedge like this, but it's also the wedge within their coalition. And by that also wedges that hopefully have to expand the we, right, by bringing some more people in who otherwise might be attracted to Trump's politics. But you raise an incredibly important set of questions about, this is an incredibly rich moment for organizing on the far right? Moments of economic crisis create opportunities for radical shifts, right, in political consciousness. And they don't inevitably break to the left or the right or in some other kind of way. It's a question of positioning and who takes advantage of that crisis to interpret it in a compelling way. And so the hard right is certainly seizing on this. And the platform that they've been given, right, through Bannon in the White House, through Breitbart as a news agency, through the credibility that was bestowed on many white nationalist news outlets, which I distinguish from Breitbart. Within the white nationalist alt-right movement, they call Breitbart alt-light as opposed to alt-right. They see it as a sympathizer, but it's not, they don't control it. It's not really their thing. They recognize that these folks are flirting with their politics, but they understand that they're not true believers. Trump opened space for them, they know he's not one of them, right? That he doesn't have any allegiance to them. So it's important for us to understand that as well. But your point about how there's this rich opportunity, dangerous opportunity from the Traditional Workers' Party, from the Patriot Militias and a variety of others, and that one of the dangers could be to the extent that they get together in a line, across their strategies is a real danger. And it's an interesting moment because whereas the militia movement, for instance, the ones that are most active in Oregon, they come from a lineage of explicit white supremacist organizing A lot of that has been bled out of the recruitment around the ideology. Even some of the organizers don't have that explicit and understanding orientation towards white supremacy, even if the stories that they tell and who the villains are and who the heroes are based on those same tropes. So there are cultural and ideological clashes between the kind of patriot movement that you're referring to and explicit white nationalist organizers, Jared Taylor, Traditional Workers' Party, and a variety of others. And it's important that those divisions remain, right? The tactics and the strategies for doing that, some I think are worth discussing in this kind of forum and on camera, and some of them are not strategies that we should discuss in ways that will be broadcast, just to be plain about that. But it is in fact the case, if you talk to people, as we have in many of the sort of the current generation of the patriot militia movement, they don't understand the project to be a white nationalist project. And so there are ways to press on those points that move them further and further away from that, because it forces them into a position of denying. And it's in a way an honest denial, even if it's incorrect. They don't believe that that's their project. And so pressing them can force them into a position where the distance, the gap between their articulated project and the articulated project of the open white nationalists is too big a gap to easily bridge. And so I think part of the work is that, and some of the excellent organizing work that's being done in places like Oregon has forced people to take public positions around those things that we can use. And that's a really important project. Now, not everybody in this room is going to be part of that project, and that's fine. There's plenty of fights to be involved in. But for folks who want to figure out how to drive that, part of it is actually pressing on the, dare I say, the least radical. I was going to say the most moderate, but that doesn't work for people. Moderate's the wrong phrase. But the least explicitly white supremacist folks to push hard on them on this question of race. And leadership equivocates because the folks who've been around and understand that this started with Posse Comitatus organizing, and then there was another generation in the 90s militias that was more or less explicit about its anti-Semitism and white supremacy, and then this generation, which is much less so, they will equivocate on questions like, whether post-emancipation citizens have the same rights as pre-emancipation citizens, which is another way of saying white folks, folks who aren't white, people of color. But most people won't. Most people move on and say, of course, we're all, if you're a citizen, and that's it. And so enforcing those questions, I think, is a really useful project. On the question of other kinds of tactics, I would invite a conversation, over a beer or over a glass of water or something. A really important part of anti-fascist work is, in fact, keeping different factions in their silos. So just acknowledge that and to lead that discussion for follow-up.
Can everybody we're gonna wrap because we're past time. And I want to respect Tarso's been on the road and whatnot, but can we all thank Tarso Ramos? And many conversations to be continued. I think you gave us lots and lots of good stuff to kind of chew on that I'm sure we'll be talking about. So thank you, Tarso.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you for spending a hot evening indoors.